I want you to move from overwhelmed by information to confident in what really matters. I want to help you move from being unsure towards direction and purpose in your healthcare. I want to introduce you to health experts. I want to let you in on tough conversations on women's health. I want to give you a place where you can lean in and learn how to take care of yourself. Let's transform your health. Let's get clear on your goals. This is Women's Health Unplugged. I'm your host, Dr. Jordan Robertson, naturopathic doctor. We're almost halfway through the year. I thought this was a great time for us to stop, do some halfway through the year reflection. I think reflection and thinking about where you are, where you want to go, and then what your own personal role is in that whole thing is really important. And so given that we're about halfway through the year and about to take a bit of a summer pause on the podcast like we did last year, I thought it was a good time to review the reflection questions that I used at the beginning of the year for myself personally, which I actually had just recently opened to review and see where I was. And when I looked back at some of the goals we had for the podcast, and one of the topic goals I wanted to cover was about this sort of radical responsibility taking that we need to have with respect to our health. And I thought the two ideas lined up really well. That it's often the people who have done the most reflection that are also able and willing to take the most radical responsibility for where they are in their journey. And so the two topics are really kind of one topic. So I use reflection questions and this ongoing sort of journaling and I'm not a consistent journaler. Let's just back up for a second. I am not a consistent journaler. I like having a gratitude practice. I like having a journaling practice, but I don't do it daily. And I think sometimes when we say the word journaling, people cringe because they imagine you sitting on this like purple pillow in the middle of a room filled with plants. And although that would be lovely, my purple pillow would be covered in dog hair and my plants would be dead. And so that idea of doing something every single day as being a metric of success with respect to reflection, I think we need to put that down, because most of my reflection and deep reflection is maybe happening twice a year. I may glance at what I've written maybe 4 times a year, including the 2 times I modify it, because that journaling every single day and checking in every single day for me isn't that helpful, because a lot of the projects that I have in my head or things that I'd like to pursue are longer term projects. And sometimes I find checking in daily or even weekly on certain items is going to give you this false impression that you're not getting anywhere, right? Sometimes we have, say, a goal of setting better boundaries, but maybe for weeks we don't really have that many opportunities to set boundaries. And if we checked in every single week on how we're doing, we might get this idea that we're kind of failing when maybe you don't see your family members that you needed to set those boundaries with often enough, or you don't get put in the situation that you get to practice some of the skills that you're working on. Or maybe the health metric or even the business metric that you're tracking is one that is best looked at over a quarter versus over a day or over a week. And again, that can give us this false sense of lack of progress. So I tend to only look at these things and make major modifications twice a year. So that's my sort of journaling practice around some of my goal setting. It's infrequent, but very intentional. And, you know, one of my goals when I come out of this sort of the journaling process is to figure out what behaviors and actions need to happen on a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, and yearly basis in order for me to meet that goal. So if you had a goal to do 10 push-ups, right, there would be maybe things that you would do daily. Maybe there are things that you would do weekly. Maybe over the course of a month, we might expect to see some change. And maybe over the course of a quarter, you'd just flat out expect to hit your goal. And so knowing what those goals are and how to break down what the process or what those daily activities need to look like for you to hit them, that's one thing that I am very good at. I'm very good at that sort of project management side of personal development. And to think, well, if I want something, if I have this thing that I want, what are the things I need to be doing every single day, week, month in order for me to achieve it? And I am totally able to put my head down and do the small things without looking up that often to see whether or not I've achieved the big thing, because I know the big thing comes at the end of the quarter or end of the year. So part of what I like about these sort of reflection pieces is that it can often just set in motion some of the actions that you need to take to achieve some of your bigger goals. It puts pen to paper on some of the areas of your own journey that you are not taking ownership over, or that you're having a lack of responsibility over, right? We can say that we want something in our head, but if we never actually put in any plan, or if we never take any steps towards achieving it, it's not really like, that's like a wish, right? That's not a goal. A goal is something that we create structure around, that we create some process towards achieving. And when we journal these pieces, or when we write them down in a very intentional way, it puts some of the things in motion for you to start to achieve them. So I used some different questions this year, and they were shared with me by a friend who had done these questions, and I really liked them. So I started with it in January and wrote down all of the pieces. And I will say, when I reopened the document in the last week, I was amazed at how many things I had accomplished, even though I hadn't looked at what my goals were since January. It didn't feel like I had made these intentional journal entries or agenda entries, like, okay, you said you don't want to do this anymore, like, cancel, Jordan. I didn't do that. And yet the number of things that over the course of 6 months that I had been able to sort of scratch off the list was really remarkable. And that's partly why I was like, oh, this would be a great conversation. And these reflection questions were quite positive for me. And I do think it will help us create some responsibility around your goals and around your health, if health is one of your goals. So the questions, we're going to go through them I'll read them all out actually at once, and then we'll go through them individually about why I think they're important, and I'll give you some examples of some of the things that I had written down. So the questions are, so number 1, things I want to bring with me into the next year or the next half year. Things I don't want to bring with me. Things I want to do that are new. Things that are on probation. That might be my favorite of the questions. Things that are on probation. If I started my life over today from scratch, what would I stop doing? What would I start doing? What do I want to spend more time on next year? What do I want to spend less time on next year? Where am I waiting for another person to make the first move? What can I do to go first instead? What can I do in the next week that will make the rest of the year easier? What can I do this year that will leave me in a better position for the following year? Who do I spend time with that pulls me down? And what do I notice about that answer? Who do I spend time with that lifts me up? What do I notice about that answer? What am I doing that I would want the film crew who's filming my life to see? What are the things I'm doing that I don't want the film crew to see? What are my goals for the next year? Do I have the right systems in place for me to make them happen? And what needs to change? And I'll put those questions in the show notes so that you can just copy them into a document. And I use a Word doc, like a Google Doc, so that it's accessible. So in the cloud or wherever I am, I can actually access it. But it does serve as this like ongoing document. I have some vision work from years ago, like pre-pandemic vision work. And it's so interesting how many of my goals have changed, but also how many of them just got strung out over maybe more years than I expected, but still happened. It's amazing some of the things that I've just carried around as the challenges, and like they just keep being challenges. And that's kind of interesting to see the things that you write in that, shit I don't want to be doing anymore pile, without some intention. We just end up carrying that pile around for a long time. Okay, so let's go through, and I want to just talk about those questions a little bit more deeply, and I want to frame it in a way that you can use these questions to, again, start to take some radical responsibility, but also celebrating your wins for where you are right now and how hard you've worked to get to this point. So the questions like things I want to bring with me into next year, that's a positive thing. And the things that I had written down were, some nutrition pieces that have been really pivotal and key for me over the last year. I have a dedicated fiction reading practice, and I'm very proud of getting back into reading more fiction. And so that was something I wanted to bring with me. There were certain work roles that I'm really happy with and really love. And so I kept those. I said those are things I want to bring with me. My lifting coach and just lifting in general. Even though I have lots of weeks and months where I kind of want to quit my weightlifting, I overall, and when you think about the things that you want, you don't want to live your life without, that was one of the things that I had written down that I'd really like to bring with me. And then when I looked at the things that I didn't want to bring with me, some of them were my behaviors, right? So I had some comments about just how accessible I can be and how many channels there are to access me. And I had talked about this in the I Hate Email podcast. If you never listened to that one, go back and listen to that one. I think the title of it was I Hate Email and You Can Too. But they're just realizing that I have too many DM options and most of them are just work related, and it wasn't enough streamlining in some of my processes. So things like social media, etc., weren't streamlined enough. And so there's parts of that I didn't want to bring with me. There were a couple of roles that I had that were I was being supported by a couple of roles that were no longer serving the purpose, or I found that I was doing work over again, even though I had tried to outsource certain things, and I realized that I didn't really want to bring that with me any longer. And then the one I did write down that I thought was interesting, and this was just a word that came right into my head in the moment, was over-delivering. And I think that's really, I think that's very common. And when I think about the people that I work with that are trying to work on their burnout and their personal health goals, and yet have lived in this constant state of achieving an A+ in everything they do, I think that's a really neat thing to consider. And I definitely have that challenge that if I get an hour back, instead of sitting and relaxing for an hour, I will fill it with something. And so I think that was an important one to write down. And then I wrote down some new goals that I wanted to achieve on the things that I want to do that are new. But let's remember that if you have things that you want to do that are new, you have to take some things out, right? You can't just make a huge list of things that you want to do that are new. So when I looked at my bullet points, there were 6 things that I was not bringing with me into 2023, and there were only 4 things that I wanted to do that were new, and 2 of them were things that would be outsourced, that I needed to, launch the project, but then outsource the rest of it. And so really there were only 2 things that I was adding that were new. I said my favorite question was the things that are on probation. And I think this is a really cool question because it's common that we have sort of a mediocre relationship with something in our life, and we never really put it on probation. Like, what does being on probation mean? First of all, to me, that word means that you're in a trial period where that thing needs to prove itself a little bit. There needs to be some kind of metric. There needs to be some kind of measurement on how that thing is performing. Usually we're talking about people, right, on probation. But the thing, this was, for me, it was a thing. How is this thing performing? What is my net positive for having this thing in my life? And is that okay? Is it still okay, right? Is the math on how that thing feels in my life the same as it was the day that I inherited it or grabbed onto that thing? And so if you're working on a project, or if you have something in your life that's been really long term, I've always loved that phrase, like, you get to renegotiate your contract with your relationship with people and with things whenever you want. But when we don't pull things on to being on probation, it's so easy to just have the day to day, week to week, year to year. All of a sudden a decade's gone by and you're like, you know what? I actually don't like this thing. But unless we pull it onto the on probation list, we don't even really know what to look for to decide if it's working. Whereas if we said, if you were on probation at work, what would they be looking for? Efficiency, joy, your commitment, the relationships, your output, your actual productivity, right? Like, these are the things, if you were on probation, that is what you would be looking at. So if you have a thing in your life that, and one of the things I put on probation was the podcast, which it's passing, don't panic. But I put it on probation just because when I started it, you know, my life was different. My responsibilities were different. My clinic relationships was different. And so I pulled it on probation and said, is it still meeting all of the goals and needs that I had set out for it? Just because we're good at it and just because we're reaching thousands of people, is that okay? Like, does that still meet the need? Let's put it on probation. And over the last 6 months, we've had some amazing opportunities come up because of the podcast. We've had some amazing guests, and it's passing, right? It's passing. We got some great feedback. So it's passing. But I think, unless you bring something on probation, it just becomes this routine that you're doing, and you're really not putting a lot of intention towards it. And that can make us quite resentful of the things that we're doing week to week, day to day, if we don't feel like we know where we're going with it. So I put that on probation, and right now, halfway through the year, it's passing. We will definitely be back next season. And then some of those other questions around, like, if I started over, what would I stop doing? What would I start doing? And things that I had written down, were really around the structure of my week, right? For me personally, I run a lot of things. I have a lot of people, there's a lot of meetings. And one of the things that I would have done differently or would do differently if I was starting life over from scratch is looking at just the amount of time spent in meetings. I love that sort of meetingless Monday kind of idea. And so those were some things that I had written down, but I do think that, starting over from scratch can mean a lot of things for people. Like, maybe you can't actually envision starting your life like over, like new job, new everything. I interpreted it as like if I was going to start my current roles over from scratch or my current work strategy. I didn't think about my whole life. And what do I want to spend more time on, and what do I want to spend less time on? And for me, the things that I had written down were mostly again about time management. So having some time without work, having more free time, having more time for friend dates, which is something that's not been particularly easy for me since the pandemic for a variety of reasons, but making an intentional shift towards that was part of this journaling. And then things I wanted to spend less time on started to inform the rest of the questions for me. So the things that I had written down was like, I would like to make less decisions. And if you own your own business, or if you are in that kind of management leadership role, there's always moments where, when you make a shift and all of a sudden everything is bottlenecking at you as the primary decision maker. And there's lots of ways and strategies to empower the people that work for you or that are around you to make more decisions on their own. I had to call it out for myself because I had added a whole bunch of projects and ideas and things to various areas of my work, but we hadn't put in enough infrastructure and enough guidelines, essentially, for the people that were responsible for some of those projects to feel confident enough to make decisions on their own, which I own. Like, I own that. And that's part of what I want you to think about as we go through the rest of these questions is, like, where can you own this? So if I want to make less decisions, I need to communicate more effectively. I need to empower the people around me to make more decisions on their own. I need to pivot less in my head, right? And not tell anybody, because then that means no one gets to make any decisions if everything lives in my brain. And so when I write the things down, like, what do I want to spend less time on? It's not like a, stomp your feet, hands on your hips. I don't want to make any more decisions. It has to be about what your responsibility is in that thing being in your life less often, right? And so the second one was like, I don't want to repeat myself. I don't like repeating myself. Again, that's me, right? That's if I don't take good notes of my own work, if I don't write shit down to pass to someone well, if I don't articulate myself well because I'm, sharing half-formed ideas, all of those things lead to me having to repeat it. And so if that's my goal, then I'm the one that has to take radical responsibility for my interactions with others to stop repeating myself. And even with my kids, right? I don't like repeating myself with my kids. And so I've had to create some strategies where instead of asking my daughter to do 3 things, we do 1 at a time, right? Because that works better for her and it makes me feel less frustrated so I don't have to repeat myself. And then the last one that I had written down that I wanted to spend less time on was meetings, right? So you can see the theme there. But all of those actually are my responsibility. If I want to make less decisions, I need to behave differently. I need to show up differently. If I don't want to repeat myself, like, let's remember, like, if we're repeating ourselves, it's not because the people that we were talking to weren't listening, right? I mean, maybe, rarely, the person you're listening to is distracted or they weren't ready for the information. But even then, like, why am I giving you information that you're not ready for, right? Like, I'm going to own this. I'm going to carry it around that if I'm frustrated with repeating myself, I need to do things differently. And if I don't like meetings, then I need to structure things differently in order for them to happen less often or for them to be highly effective and productive. So if there's something that you want to spend less time on next year, right? If I just asked you that question, what do you want to spend less time on next year? Whatever you said, you got to own it. Like, you got to own why it's there in the first place. You are at least 50% of the problem on those things, especially if it involves other people, right? If you're tired of doing all the housework, you're 50% of that. And you can't, again, put your hands on your hips and stomp your feet and say, I'm not bringing any housework into 2024. You didn't set things up for that to be possible. And so you got to take radical responsibility for what our role is in the way things are, right? The way things are right now is partly because of us, right? Maybe not wholly, and I acknowledge that there's lots of things that are outside of our control, but if we want to change it, we need to take responsibility and own our role in it. Where am I waiting for another person to make the first move? I really liked this reflection question. It made me sit back and think about opportunities I was waiting for rather than opportunities I just created myself. And really, and the email podcast, if you haven't listened to this one, I said in the email podcast, when was the last time someone sent you an email that was a life-changing opportunity? Like never. maybe twice in my career have I had a life-changing email or opportunity come from someone else. And 99% of all of the other opportunities that I've had, I created myself. And so waiting for someone else to make the first move on anything, on a friendship, on a relationship, on a project, on a job application, like that, we're waiting for someone else to control our destiny. Where if you're waiting, I really like that follow-up question of like, where can you go first? And for sure, sometimes the ball is not in our court, right? But there's maybe some steps you can take to move towards the goal that you have. That means, okay, well, I put the ball over there. Now it's with that person. And unfortunately, I just have to wait for them. But in the meantime, what do I have control over, right? What can I take control over? And so for me, it was around, I was waiting for some various organizations to notice what I was doing with our integrative medicine platform for NDs. I was waiting for them to think I was cool rather than me going out there and doing it on my own and creating the opportunity for myself. And it's interesting because I had just written this down in January, and without even realizing that this was starting to plant the seeds of ideas and also starting to plant the actions that I started taking in order to make these things happen. And when I opened the document last week, I was like, oh my God, I actually did that. But I didn't do it intentionally. I had written it down, but it actually started to plant the seeds of things that I needed to do and follow through on so that I could take control of my own process. What can I do in the next week that will make the next year easier? And for you, that might look like planning. That was one of mine. There's certain planning, like defining roles, defining responsibilities, mapping out things over the course of the year can make things run way more smoothly than, if you have to make lots of decisions or if you have to fly by the seat of your pants. If you're flying by the seat of your pants somewhere in your life, food, exercise, right? Somewhere you're flying by the seat of your pants. That question should really be about how can I create infrastructure so that I don't feel that way about it. If you're flying by the seat of your pants with your food, try on food delivery for 6 months just to see what it feels like. If you're flying by the seat of your pants with your exercise, hire someone to help you with your exercise or sign up for some kind of app that just tells you what to do so that you don't need to feel like you're flying by the seat of your pants all the time. If you're struggling with money, if you're struggling with time, right? Sometimes when we're in the weeds or we're in survival mode, it's really hard to see how planning is going to help, right? I totally get that. If you are swamped with shit, and I'm like, you know what you should do? You should take like a half day and plan your life. You're like, come on, Jordan, that's crazy. Except that we know that that's actually what gets people out of the weeds. Because if you even envision that you don't even have time to sit down and answer these questions, you're like listening to this while you're commuting or while you're on a walk and you're killing two birds with one stone. And you're like, yeah, these questions are nice, but I could never find the time to sit down and answer them. That is your sign that you need to sit down and answer them. Because mapping things out can help you feel so much more organized and actually take a big load of decision making off of your plate. So for me, it's all about mapping out when I said, what can I do in the next week or the next year that will put me in a better position? Every single bullet in my journal starts with the word map out. Map out the financials of, map out the roles of, map out the content for. They're all about mapping it out. Because if you have a map for the year, it really puts you on a good path for knowing exactly what you need to do next. And when you get lost, right, in November and you don't know where you're going with your goals, you've mapped it out. And so you actually know what needs to happen. And mapping things out like that, apparently I really love that term, map it out. actually also helps you understand what your day-to-day activities need to look like to meet your goals. Because if you've mapped it out and you're like, okay, by the end of the year, I need to do this, you can start to see automatically what your daily life needs to look like to get there. But if you don't map it out, right, then all of a sudden you're just, in the weeds of doing things the way you've always done them, and you're not actually feeling like you're getting anywhere. That's why people sign up for races. That, and because people who sign up for races are crazy, but that's why people sign up for races or like a Tough Mudder or something like that, because it gives them this destination, and then it gives them this backwards map of what their training kind of needs to look like in order to show up on that day. So whatever your goal is, you just have to set a race day. And if race day is December 31st, what are all the things you need to do between now and the end of the year in order for you to meet your goals? Who do I spend time with that pulls me down, and who do I spend time with that lifts me up? And the thing I think that's most important about this question is what do I notice? So we can write down all the people we have a super beef with right now, but then the real important part is, what do I notice about this answer? And when I had written down things that I was being dragged down by, or situations I was being dragged down by, what I noticed is that I needed to be clearer about how people can make their own decisions and show them basically the line, like show them done, to borrow a bit of a Brene Brown term there. Like if people don't know where they're going, then they're going to want to have a meeting, or they're going to make you repeat yourself, or they're going to circle back to you before you want them to. And what I realized is that the situations in my work life that were making me frustrated had everything to do with my lack of clarity about what I wanted. And so that was what I noticed. It was like every single one of these bullets is in my control to actually make this better. And then what I noticed about the people who lift me up was that I wasn't actually creating intentional time to spend time with those people. Except for one person who runs all of my work. I intentionally see her all the time. But everybody else that was in the list that lifts me up, I never see them. And so that was a really positive thing for me to go through and write down all the people I love. And then I'm like, wait, where are they in my calendar? They aren't, right? Except for Kate. And so I had to reflect on that and be like, look, at the beginning, you said one of your goals was to have more friends. And then halfway through, you listed all these people that you love, but you don't see them. And so again, radical responsibility. So I took that list, I went to my husband, and I'm like, we need to see these people. We need to see these people, invite these people over for dinner. And we actually have been successful at being connected with those people. And one of them I actually even have lunch with this week because of this exercise. And I haven't seen them in like 4 years. Again, it wouldn't happen if there wasn't intentionality around it. And so whether you are acknowledging people that lift you up, or hobbies that lift you up, or something that lifts you up, where is it in your life? And if it isn't there, you get to make a decision and a choice to bring it back in. Because we can't love something and then just never do it, right? Like, what are we doing this all for? And then the film crew thing, the things I would love the film crew to see versus what things I would not love the film crew to see. And those are sort of the last reflection questions. I'm proud of things like my reading and walking my dogs and working from home and how much I delegate. I think the thing that I didn't want the film crew to see was that maybe there could be better clarity around some of my delegation. I definitely didn't want the film crew to like sneak in on moments of feeling lonely or inadequate. And so that was interesting to kind of write down. And then scrolling social media was something I wrote down. Like, I feel like that would just be flat out embarrassing, right? If the aliens come in from the, outer space and they're like, what are all these people doing, right? They're like looking at this tiny box and that's it. Like, they're just like literally could be sitting beside each other and yet they're, laughing at their phone. That was one thing I didn't think I wanted the film crew to see. And so I put time limits on my social media apps this year. I've hid them off my main screen of my phone. I've set muting on my computer and on my phone during work hours. And so messages don't actually make it to me, / my social media doesn't make it to me. I've turned off all of my notifications because of how many there are. And I just don't need to see them. If someone likes my post, great. I don't need to see it actually. And so that exercise of like acknowledging the things I'm proud of and the wins, but then also acknowledging that there are some things that I'm not proud of that I'm, still doing is really important, because I got to set in motion things that are going to change that, right? And things that are going to influence that. And I've connected with people and things and habits and support that actually makes all of those things happen less often naturally. So those questions I want you to do. And I said at the beginning, I had 2 topics in mind. One of them was about the half-year reflection, but the other was about taking radical responsibility for your goals. And I truly believe that those 2 topics belong together, because if you're not going to take the time to reflect on where you've been, where you want to go, and then map out the steps it would take for you to get there, they're just wishes. Right? You wish you were fitter. You wish you ate better. You wish you could spend more time with your family. But if you want to be the person who does those things, you have to act like the person who does those things. And part of that is bringing some level of intention and responsibility to those things and acting with this, again, radical responsibility. I love that term, because it reminds us that even the situations that I wrote down where I was like, this is pissing me off, it's my fault, right? The reason that that's happening is my fault. And so sitting back and going, what is my role in all the things right now that I am unhappy with? What is my role? And what can I change? Where can I be the first person to make a move? Those are the steps that are required in order for you to truly get better. And when we look at the patients that truly get better, they're the ones that have that ability, or the ones that maybe don't have that ability when we meet them, but they're willing to go there, even though it's incredibly uncomfortable. But if you find yourself at the doctor's office going, the thing you gave me didn't work, or the thing you said wasn't true, or I tried that and it didn't help, just take a breath and ask yourself, what's my role in this? Did I journal this well enough? And I think you'll be surprised at the answer. And I definitely know that you'll be surprised at how far you can get by the end of December. I hope you enjoyed that episode of Women's Health Unplugged. My goal is to help you feel more confident about your health. Please remember that what we talked about today in the podcast does not constitute medical advice, nor was a doctor-patient relationship formed. If you have questions about your healthcare or about how today's topic pertains to you, please take it up with your family doctor, your specialist, or someone on your health team.